Hi there. So my name is Craig Howie, and this morning I'm going to be speaking to you about digital design review for buildings. I'm based in South Africa, and I'm on the east coast of South Africa in Durban this morning. So jumping right into it, a bit of an introduction. Many of us have been doing this BIM thing for a few years now. The big question in the industry remains, are we really getting the benefits we should be getting out of these three-dimensional information-rich models that we're producing? This presentation will unpack the subject of digital design review, as this is surely something that we can, or at least one of the biggest benefits that we can get out of a BIM process. Yet I suspect that we still often do not see this fully realized on projects in Africa. So what is design review? Well, design review is a series of steps which is part of the design process to ensure that the final design or building meets expectations. That could be expectations of other people within your own team. That could be expectations of other consultants, of contractors, of our clients. In its simplest form, um, design review consists of roughly about 6 steps. Um, Give or take, depends on which company you're working in. But essentially, the basics are that step one, someone does some work. Um, ISO refers to that person as the originator. That person, step two, that person checks their own work. Some companies refer to that as a self-check. Step three, someone else comes in and checks or reviews their work, often referred to as the reviewer. Step four, some form of discussion takes place based on the design that has been presented. Corrections and updates are requested by the reviewer um, between the reviewer and the originator. Step five, the agreed corrections and updates are made and checked by the corrector or the person that actually has originated the information. That information then goes back to the reviewer to confirm that the updates and corrections have been made in the way that they were expecting them to have been made, and then an approval occurs. At AECOM, we've put together what we refer to as a technical quality review um, process. We're obviously a large company, so we have to have quite rigid processes in the way that we do reviews and verifications and approvals and that sort of thing. So we've just gone through a couple of months of development where we've put together a Microsoft Power App and created a navigator document for our teams to navigate the different types of checks and reviews and verifications that are required on projects. And in particular, we've built this around our primary platform for doing reviews being Autodesk BIM 360. So you can see that we've got quite a lot of different reviews within this Power App, and that it's quite detailed with when you're in quite a big engineering company like ours. Okay, so what types of files get checked and reviewed? There's obviously different types of files. So you've got documents, your standard Word type documents, Excels, PowerPoints. Then you have your drawings, which could consist of maybe an exported CAD format, like a DWG format, or your outputs, your PDF drawings. You then have calculations. Many calculation software or applications don't really have their own checking mechanisms within those tools as such. So you have to use other solutions to verify and approve those documents or those calculations. And then you've got your 3D models that you need to check and review. And that goes for both your graphical information and your non-graphical information. So with these four different types of checks and reviews, essentially you're going to most times need to use different types of software, because different types of software or technologies um, work with these file formats more optimally. So the question really is, what type of technologies and software platforms are you using to do these different types of checks? Um, for our team, we generally use Microsoft Teams and SharePoint for doing reviews on documents. Um, we generally find that doing checks and reviews in the native format of a file is always best. That definitely is the case with Word documents and Excel, where you obviously have products like Microsoft 365 or Office 365, where you're able to now you've got various review functions within those platforms. So you're able to use comments, you're able to use at mentions and actually be quite interactive with other team members that you're asking them to do tasks within the Word document that you're reviewing with them. You also obviously have track changes and that sort of thing within the Office products, which are really nice. So it really makes sense to do document reviews in the software that you are using to author that information. Then for drawings, we generally use um, Revit for authoring the information, and then we publish that information to Autodesk BIM 360, and we're able to review drawings within that BIM 360 cloud platform. We're still quite heavily using PDFs in our process, even though there are new features now coming out in platforms like BIM 360 where you're able to actually review published sheets that are actually published directly, sheets from your Revit model or even views from your Revit model. We still like to have a PDF to do those certain reviews in-house on, and then have a bit more of a paper trail on those particular documents. Then calculations, what we find is generally the applications, like I said, don't have built-in reviewing functionality. So we'll often have an internal form that people fill out that may be a PDF form or a Word form that we can very quickly in Office 365 add signatures to and tick boxes and that sort of thing. So that's how we do our reviews on calculations. And then on models, definitely new players in the market like BIM 360 model coordination. We're starting to use that a lot more when we're doing 3D model reviews. But applications like Navisworks still for more complicated projects is still the sort of go-to when you have to federate models from many different applications and models are quite complex. Right, then what types of checks and reviews need to get done on 3D models? I think the common misconception in the industry is we always seem to talk about clash detection, but actually that's just one form of review or check of models that we need to do. I'm very pro on actually not doing clash detection too early in projects. I see that happening a lot in the industry at the moment, that from week one people want to do clash detection, and that's really just not that practical. Um, while you're still in a design development process, a lot of stuff's changing. If you're trying to resolve clashes of elements that are still most likely going to be moving around and changing, clash detection can very quickly become counterproductive. You can spend a lot of time doing clashing when things are actually still going to change. That then results in abortive work. So we very much so keen on people doing visual checks. So again, applications like BIM 360 model coordination are making this now more accessible to the wider project team. So, we want our modelers, we want our engineers to go into these cloud-based tools and actually do virtual walkthroughs through their models and just look for things, look for things that don't look right. Then you've got your metadata, your classification, and your LOD checks. So still in the African market, we're still looking at most clients, if they even are requesting 3D models, they're still very much looking at the graphical side of 3D models and the coordination side. They're not really putting forward very detailed metadata or information requirements that they request through their projects. But definitely with some of our more global clients that are coming to Africa and doing work, and then some of the work that our teams are involved in internationally at the moment, we're seeing a very significant change in mindset. We're doing a lot of work for our Middle East offices at the moment, and the clients there are very much asking for metadata and information within each element. So that's then therefore something that we're needing to check to confirm. Okay, we've got a particular wall type, and that wall type has to have certain metadata attached to it to be compliant with our contractual requirements. Also, classification is a big thing. Still, classification in Africa is pretty loose. Definitely on the quantity surveying side in South Africa, they seem to be locked into classification systems, but on the design side, it seems as though every company sort of does their own thing when it comes to classification and specification. But again, international clients are looking for certain classification systems, and then you're needing to check to see if you're complying with those classification systems. And then obviously LOD checks, so your level of development checks. So is your graphical output at the right amount of detail? Is your information at the right amount of, does it have enough information in it? And can that particular object be relied on for the stage that you are busy delivering to? So that's really important. I still think that this is something that's not really focused on in the South African market, at least, or in the African market. Um, and it really is a big part of the whole BIM process that we're sort of skipping out or haven't really paid that much attention to. Then only do you get to clash detection, and in our opinion, clash detection only really should happen sort of midway through projects. You shouldn't be doing it too early. You should be doing a level of clash detection maybe before tender and post tender. But you shouldn't be doing it too early while stuff is still changing too much. Then you've got your final set of checks. Again, this is something that in South Africa, in the African market, we don't see this getting done regularly enough, but is actual just best practice modeling checks. So actually running audits on models on whichever authoring software you're working in, Civil 3D, ArchiCAD, Revit, actually opening up that model before you issue it and actually looking at are the best practice modeling techniques used? Is the file size correct? Are there, is there an issue with links or imported CAD files? Are the objects in the model at the correct quality? Are they got the correct naming standards? All that sort of thing. So that's definitely a big part of this whole sort of checking review ecosystem. And we definitely feel that you have to be doing all four of these types of checks and reviews to really have good quality outputs. Okay, so we do within businesses and companies have different types of checks and reviews. At ACOM, we have a lot of checks and reviews and verification processes, and it's quite complicated, just because the nature of the scale of projects we work on and the scale of our business. But essentially, in each company, there should most times be some form of checking process and some sort of review process. If we look at the ISO, for example, they talk about working in a work in progress environment within your different task teams. That information, before it moves into the next container, needs to be checked or reviewed or approved before it moves into that shared area. Once it's in the shared area, before you move it out into the next container, into the published area, that information needs to be what they refer to as reviewed or authorized. So generally, your checking process is more of the sort of work in progress, ongoing checks, and then you've got more of a formal review authorization process as you issue information. I think most companies will have something like that. It may just be they may just use different terminology and that sort of thing. One of the key things that also comes out of the ISO standards is the suitability codes, and I'm still not really seeing this implemented on projects in South Africa. Possibly because people are still wrapping their heads around how they change their file naming standards and how they actually achieve this within some of the platforms that they're working in day to day. But that's also really critical, is when we're sharing information for people to check it or for people to review it, or even for people to use that information, we need to give some sort of indication on what the suitability of that drawing or that model is. So I think in the UK ISO standards, or at least their version of the addendum to the ISO, I think their file naming standard has captured this quite well, where you have these different suitability codes. And I think that really plays a big part in sharing information, and then people understanding when you're sharing information with them what the use case is for that information. What level of checking has it gone through? What level of review has it gone through? Which really needs to happen more on African projects. Okay, so design review then and now. Obviously, design review is changing. In the past, we would have produced hard copy drawings, and if you made changes, you had to pull out your sort of razor and start scratching away at your drawing to make those updates. Times are changing. We're obviously starting to use different tools and different techniques. I think what we are definitely seeing in the industry is that in the past we most probably were more deliberate in the way that we designed. We're maybe more deliberate in the way that we checked and reviewed things, because we knew that if we started documenting something and drawing something, making changes and having to use a razor to scratch things out was really not, we couldn't make mass changes that easily without it being really disruptive. What we're seeing these days now on projects is changes happen almost every day, and they happen very late in project programs. So there's definitely a significant change in the way that that's happening. how you manage that sort of change management process, even with all these technologies and platforms that we have access to, is critical to the success of projects. And I think we've almost been our own worst enemy with some of the technologies, is that in theory, it's relatively easy to make those changes, but we don't always, using the technologies, it's not like the razor situation, but those changes often have major effects on other stakeholders within the value chain. So, a very late change I'm going to use architecture as an example, by architecture can really affect many disciplines further down the line. So you really need your checking processes and review processes to try to be in place to try avoid those late changes coming through, and that all the different disciplines have given the right amount of level of input and checking of information where there's interdisciplinary interfaces to try avoid downstream issues. So at the moment, to contextualize this, I guess some people, previously they did design review on paper and 2D hard copy drawings. Then some people moved to a hybrid of 2D hard copy drawings, and then some started using 3D models also to do reviews. Then some people replaced the 2D hard copy drawings with 2D on-screen markup tools and paired that with sort of detached 3D models. And I think we're still very much so in that sort of space, in at least in the South African market, where the design review remains heavily focused on 2D drawings. After all, that is the output that our clients most often ask for as a contractual requirement. So our approach is still very 2D centric, even though we are producing these 3D models. They are often almost secondary. But yeah, we are definitely seeing new technologies and review methodologies coming through slowly, and a slow shift to a more 3D focused review process. But still, that's most probably very slow or too slow in region. So we are in a little bit of a dilemma at the moment with 2D versus 3D. We, as an industry, still need to change our approach to our delivery model. At least that's my opinion. We're still not being effective enough. And at the moment, what happens is in most cases, the company will produce a 3D model up front. That a lot of the time is purely to try produce a render of that building that they're designing to sell their idea. They then very rapidly have to quickly produce some drawings of that design, again to try sell that idea. And then they start going through a change process and cycle, and they then have changes come in, and they have to change the 3D model, and they have to change the drawings, and then that just continues throughout the life cycle of the project. Whereas I think we need to shift the way that we approach our 3D models and a review process with our clients. So it needs to be, we produce a 3D model to capture the ideas and of the client, and then, or at least the expectations of the client. And then any big changes that need to be made, we should then be making those on the 3D models and going through a process with the client, with the other consultants in a 3-dimensional space. Because while we're working just in 3D, changes are relatively easy to make, and we can make decisions quite quickly. As soon as we start the 2D drafting process, also, and we start doing annotations and dimensions and notes and all that sort of thing, then it becomes very expensive. Well, it becomes a lot more expensive to be making changes. Whereas if we just go through a process with on our projects where we focus more on the 3D, make the significant changes on the 3D model, get sign off on the sort of on the 3D model and the overall design, and then move into documenting the project and doing all your annotations and your 2D outputs. That would help significantly with the change management process that we're experiencing on projects at the moment, because it is a lot of work if you do a 3D model and you produce your 2D drawings and then there's a change, you're having to go change the 3D model and then update the yes, you're working in a BIM environment, so yes, the 2D does update, but there's still annotations and that sort of stuff that you need to go and change, and that's really not an optimal approach to the way that we need to be getting the biggest benefits out of a BIM process. And we are seeing clients that do in their contracts ask for a more 3D centric approach to the design process. And I really think that fundamental shift in the way that we put 3D first and then 2D is something that we need to be doing more of. Okay, so there's a couple of different trends and technologies in the industry at the moment, and they definitely are going to be and are going to be impacting design review in the AEC sector. I think just we need to be wary and we need to sort of be cautious of the noise in the industry at the moment to do with some of these technologies, and we just need to be quite realistic about, are these technologies scalable across all our projects, and then also how practical are they with the current climate. We don't all have massive budgets to go and spend on some technologies and platforms. We've got to be practical about how we go about this. So some of the technologies and trends I'll run through quickly now. I guess the first one is virtual reality. No surprise there. You're able to use virtual reality for selling your ideas, but you're also able to use virtual reality for doing design reviews. And I really believe that virtual reality was poised to be the next major industry disruptor when it comes to design review, just because of its immersive nature and how accessible it's become. That definitely is going to be affected and has been affected by COVID-19. Being able to share a headset with multiple people in a room with hygiene and considerations and social distancing, I really think that COVID-19 is going to stifle the development of VR in the design space for at least the next 12 to 18 months. What we've seen in the last few months, though, is that definitely stuff like the headsets are becoming a lot more affordable. They're having much better graphics. They're becoming a lot smaller. They're becoming a lot more responsive. They're becoming a lot more mobile friendly. We have an HTC Vive in each one of our design offices in South Africa, and they're quite cumbersome. You have base stations on tripods. You have cables. You have very highly spec'd computers to run the headset. It wasn't really, hasn't really been that mobile friendly. But an example of a headset now that, tetherless headset, meaning no cable, is the Oculus Quest that I've got on the screen at the moment. Very small, very compact, very high quality, and you can do design review on those headsets for certain types of buildings. We're also seeing some great developments in the actual applications that we use, and how they're starting to integrate a bit better. You know, previously you had to take your Revit model or whatever you're authoring in, take it out to a specialist application, post edit, and then create a scene that goes onto your headset. That's slowly become more accessible. You know, we like to use Enscape because you're able to take models out of Revit through the Enscape add-in onto a headset quite quickly. But in reality, Enscape, you know, still doesn't really have the greatest design review features compared to some of the other VR applications on the market. One of the applications that I have been quite impressed with is the Insight VR. In particular, the way that you're able to actually pull models directly off of BIM 360, which in our case, we have our model sitting on BIM 360, and how you're able to interact with your VR scene. So you're able to create issues from within the VR. Those issues go up to BIM 360, where you've got all your sort of issues that you've been putting in on the screen. And it's more of an integrated environment. You don't have VR sitting to the one side and then your sort of traditional or your design review process sitting off to the other side. So VR is definitely, you know, technology is there, the hardware and the software is really looking good, but unfortunately we limited with COVID-19. Then we're seeing the trend of sort of cloud. Obviously, everybody's working in the cloud at the moment to some level. So cloud is obviously a big thing, and doing reviews on the cloud is obviously a major thing, but nothing really new. Then we're seeing the trend of automated clash detection starting to come through. So you know, where you put a whole lot of models into a particular cloud location, and then the actual application does the clash detection for you, and you don't physically have to run clash tests and that sort of thing, and then gives you instant feedback on those clashes. So I've mainly been exposed to this automated clash detection through the BIM 360 model coordination module. I think, you know, it's a very exciting space. I think it is really at the moment suited to smaller to medium-sized projects that are not very complicated. It is suited to projects where all disciplines are working in Revit. I don't think it's at this stage that user-friendly to other file formats, even though they are making improvements regularly. I still think it's very Revit-centric. It is suited to projects where teams have the time to take on doing a level of clash detection themselves. That to me is quite a big talking point, is do we even want our modelers sitting and doing a lot of fiddling with clash detection that's automated, that may not be very direct in what they're needing to be doing. So I think where you've got senior staff and they're able to look at the automated clashes and very quickly deal with those, then you know that's where model coordination or a automated clash detection process is going to work well. Where you've got slightly junior staff, you could have people spending a lot of time fiddling with clashes that actually are not really clashes on site, or actual constructability issues, or just not relevant to the stage that they're in. So I have some apprehensions about how that will actually work day to day in companies. Definitely think that the automated process needs to be administered and monitored carefully. So BIM managers, BIM coordinators are still going to need to facilitate the whole process, and guide people on how they need to be working with it. And then I guess the bigger question is, how are these applications licensed? I'm not going to get into that in this presentation, but will we be able to actually use these applications on projects in South Africa and in projects in Africa with the makeup of how people have software licensed? Will it be a practical licensing model that it's sort of a bring your own license to a project and you can use that? That to me would make sense, but I don't believe it's going to necessarily be that way. So yeah, so that's the automated clash detection, definitely an exciting space. Then sticking to the theme of automated, obviously I spoke earlier about how people need to do model audits or best practice modeling checks. So there's obviously a couple of different ways that you're able to do that at the moment. One of the ways of doing that is to just check it manually within Revit. You have an Excel spreadsheet and it's got a series of checks that you need to go and do, and you manually go and look in Revit and see, are we compliant? Yes. Are we compliant? Yes. Are we compliant? That's one way of doing it. I don't think it's a very practical way of doing it long term, on the nature of projects that are in the industry at the moment, where there is really honestly not time to do all these different checks manually. There needs to be a level of automation for it to be practical. So another option, in particular with people authoring in, say, Revit, um, is platforms like Dynamo, where you can create Dynamo scripts that can do a level of model audits or checks. I still believe that Dynamo is relatively specialized, and to be good at it, you have to be doing it quite often. So, you know, you're either going to have a lot of people dabbling with it in their private time, or you're going to get people in larger companies being able to have specialist full-time people doing this sort of scripting work and programming. But that's not going to be accessible to your smaller, medium scale companies. Then you do have some industry add-ins. I still think that there's a huge gap in the market for this sort of health check auditing type work. And then you've got your in-house add-ins. So again, your bigger companies able to do this, where you're able to develop your own add-ins within Revit um, that can do these checks for you. So the screen grams that I've got on the right here is the ACOM's version, current version. We've gone through a couple of iterations of how we do model analytics. But this is one of the latest ones where one of our guys in one of our international teams has produced a Revit add-in, and then that add-in basically runs a series of Dynamo scripts, and then feeds you back information in a dashboard within essentially within a startup page within a Revit environment. So it feeds that information back in, and you can see this sort of dashboard and whether or not your model is healthy or it's got unhealthy practices in it. Okay, then to maybe some of the more sort of futuristic thinking around review and checking. Again, our international teams are making some progress with machine learning and self-checking. So we've gone out and we've produced um, the ACOM Learning Intelligence, or ALI platform, which is a machine learning algorithm, and we're busy training that that platform or that application on different ACOM designs to automatically detect statistically unique or faulty components in designs. And that particular application or add-in is able to run um, on our Revit model sitting within BIM 360. Ali's capability includes spotting clashing, unconnected and duplicate or incorrectly sized objects, as well as unclassified or incorrectly classified components. So it's essentially an automated self-checking tool. Still definitely very early days with machine learning and with Revit models. To me, it's more of a proof of concept really at this stage. But definitely that is where we're heading. I still believe that we need to become a lot more consistent with the way that we model within authoring applications for machine learning really to understand how we do things and being able to automate things. Whereas if we, have a, a designer come in and do something differently every time, then you don't, it's very difficult for the algorithm to understand how things should be done correctly. And then also classification systems, machine learning will need certain classification systems and some sort of structured information to really be effective. Okay, so there's a couple of challenges in the industry at the moment with design review. I definitely think that we're spending a lot of time as design consultants reviewing things that previously would have been dealt with on site. And we definitely need to question our efforts into some of these things that we're doing in 3D models, whereas previously in a 2D environment, we just wouldn't have done them. So we're now doing more work and not necessarily getting more money. And that's something real, that's a real commercial sort of thing that we need to give thought to. Then we're also doing a level of coordination at a very fine level of detail. In these virtual models, we're able to really get into the detail of, this is 10 mils away from this thing and this thing's 30 mils away from this thing. But in reality, that's very easy to do in the virtual environment. But actually, how do we now communicate this high level of detail to somebody that needs to construct this on site? How practical is that? So what we're seeing is people are doing a lot of high level or a lot of detail coordination, moving things this way, moving things this way, but then we're still producing the same level of drawing that we used to in the past. So it doesn't necessarily have every single dimension that that person would need to deliver that model at the same, or to install that particular system or whatever we're busy detailing at the same level of detail that we have it in the same level of positional accuracy that we have it in that model. So that definitely is a challenge. And then one of the other things is what I'm seeing is a trend of software vendors releasing product to market very quickly, and often they are still busy troubleshooting that product. And what they're doing is they're releasing product to market that is still slightly unrefined, and then they're relying on industry feedback to do their R&D and to improve that product. And that's a big challenge to our projects. We don't want to be, we want to be innovative and we want to be at the forefront of technology, but we also don't want to be at the bleeding edge of it too often. So getting a balance of that is a little bit tricky at the moment. Definitely, it's been our experience over the last year and a half. So in conclusion, have a good idea of what you want to achieve with design review. It may not necessarily match what I've outlined today. We as a company have very specific requirements of what design review entails. Consider your opportunities to optimize your review process by digitizing. and that will mean different things to different companies. Consider new trends and technologies to achieve this. Um, Again, just be practical in what you're trying to implement. Don't get caught up with the hype of the latest and greatest tech. Maybe sometimes it pays you to be a laggard with some of the new tech, and then sometimes it pays you to be right up there at the forefront of it. And then the last thing is just consider what you're doing and how you're doing it, and whether or not that actually is providing value to your projects. So thanks a lot for your time today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the sessions on the BIM Harambee Africa program, and I hope to present to you again in the future. Thank you. Bye.